all that feedback, but to use it effectively, we need to be able to use reflection, as we saw in the feedback loop. No matter what our learning style, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a minute, we all need to be able to reflect. Teaching and training professions have referred to Kolb's reflective cycle, and I'm going to look at it now. We need to embed this into our self-awareness and our development planning. No matter what our preferred learning style, we all need to be able to reflect to learn. So Kolb's reflective cycle talks about us having experiences. We all come across new things happen to us at work, we experience things, we see things. And the problem is, it's what we do with that makes a difference. If we reflect on it, we think about the impact it has had on us, how it's made us feel, how it's affected others, and then we can take that to the conceptualized stage where we start to think about how it could be incorporated into what we do to improve us, embedded in our development on a personal side, and we think about how it could be brought into our team to make changes in the work environment that could benefit us all. From that, we then try and carry out those things, we try and practice them, we test them, we apply them, and from that we have another experience, and from that experience we then continue the cycle. So it is a process that continues, and I suppose it sort of sums up the process of continuous learning and development, really. We need this for our self-awareness, otherwise we're just going to continue to do the same thing and ignore those new experiences and those things that come up. So that's reflection, and we all need that, but let's have a look at how that fits into different people's preferred learning styles. I've mentioned learning styles quite a few times then. So what is a learning style, you may ask? Well, it's simply a manner in which you learn best. Some of you may have done a learning styles questionnaire before. You may be aware of your learning styles. Others may have heard of some of the things that we'll talk about, and others may have no experience at all. But after this, you should have been able to identify yours and use some common learning styles questionnaires. It's about basing it on your individual characteristics and preferences. Individual learning styles are important, and we need to consider them when developing people, because different people learn in different ways, and if we're training staff in the workplace or we're trying to develop ourselves, we need to be aware. When used generally, the term learning styles refers to one of the theories, because there's different learning styles and different theories, but these theories all propose that we can be classified into a certain style, a way of learning that is best for us, and they define slightly different categories, but the principles are still all clear, is that we need to understand them and we need to differentiate or individualize for different people. We'll start with one of the more commonly used ones, and probably one of the simplest or most basic ones, but very effective, and that's VARK. You'll get to do one later in the activity, and you can also get a colleague, a team member to do one so that you can compare them. More on that later. But it's a set of simplistic questions in the questionnaire which, after you've given answers, help to categorise you into one of the 4 preferred learning styles. I say preferred because it doesn't mean that's the only way you can learn, and it doesn't mean that is that you can't use the other ways in conjunction with it. But let's have a quick look at what VARK stands for. Firstly, it's not complicated because there's no codes. It's just VARK stands for visual, oral, read, write, and kinesthetic. And they're simply the categories. They say that visual learners like to see things, they watch, they like graphical representations, whereas oral, audio learners like to listen and be told things. Read-write learners like to read, research, write notes and do assignments, and kinesthetic learners are tactile in their learning style. They like to learn carrying out physical activities rather than listening, lecturing or watching demonstrations. So in VARK we had 4 categories: visual, oral, read and write and kinesthetic. And the next one we look at is Honey and Mumford, which is a well-recognised learning style theory model, inspired and built upon Kolb's reflective that we talked about. They produced their own learning styles and categories questionnaire, and we'll look at that now. So their first was activists. Activists like to learn by doing. They like to get their hands dirty, have a go. They deal with getting involved directly without any fears of new concept ideas, and they sort of embrace the challenge. They like activities such as brainstorming, problem solving, getting involved in group discussions, puzzles and competitions, even enjoy role play, and they would be happy to just pick something up and have a go. So you might send someone who is an activist off to do something for the first time and just let them have a go and learn by doing and let you know how it went. The second, theorists, like to have all the information to hand so they can be fully embraced in the theory, fully comprehend what goes on behind the activities before they even have a go. They're most comfortable if they're given models, ideas, details about the end goal before they even start to participate in something. They like to fully understand how it works, what the possibilities are, how it could come together before they even have a go at it. So you might want, with that sort of person, to talk them through it, let them go away and read and reflect on it. Then they might do a little bit of the conceptualization and see how it would fit into how they might work before they would then be comfortable to have a go. Pragmatists, on the other hand, need to know from the beginning how that learning is going to be applied in reality. Conceptual theories, ideas, experimenting with new ideas or speculation is something that they need time to take on board. They learn best through having that time, but they want to know how it's going to be applied, how it's going to be put into practice. Case studies, problem solvings and discussions around what they actually do could be beneficial in getting new ideas across to them. Final category was reflectors. They like to stand back, watch, contemplate what's happening. They prefer to remain in the background, let others have a go whilst they watch from the sidelines, but they are considering what's happening, considering the various points and gathering information to come to a conclusion. They like discussions, but preferably in small groups, self-analysing, time to reflect and consider, observing demonstrations, getting feedback and views from others, from things like coaching, etc. And we don't all fit into one of these categories, so we might be a mix of things. And they also gave us, Honey and Mumford, they also gave us some categories which are coming up around the outside now, which talked about the types of learning. So active experimentation, about planning. People who learn like that like to plan how to test things out, how they're going to go about using those models. So it's go away and plan it before having a go, so they might have a case study. Reflective observation, where people watch. They like to reflect on the experiences, think about those practices and how they might put them into their context and how they might use them. So they might like to possibly use some simulation, some role plays and reflect on how it went before they put it into practice. Then there's people who learn from a concrete experience at the top there, people who actively like doing the sort of, or you might say field work or doing the task under supervision. So that might be that person you say to, right, I want you to go to something, just have a go, let me know how it goes, and then we'll build on that experience when you come back. And then finally in there we've got abstract conceptualization, so it's about thinking. They like to observe a model or a theory, see something, then explain what they might do with it. So you might have them watching videos, reading processes, and then explaining how they might go about using what they've been learning. Now, Gardner's intelligences theory is another theory altogether. He was working on the process, he was a psychologist, and he was working on the process of intelligences, and he said that people had different intelligences, not one. He said they were linguistic, logical, mathematical, musical, bodily kinesthetic, spatial, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalist. He said that learning styles were more about the ways in which people approach tasks, whereas these are about the intelligences they have and their preference to an intelligence. However, educators who were struggling to put people into the categories or the styles of the other learning styles have quite often used these, and they developed the concept of learning styles from these. And And bodily kinesthetic is an intelligence that entails using one's own body to create products or to solve problems. So these people are like physical experiences, basically, is what the principal was saying. Interpersonal reflects the ability to recognize or understand other people's moods, desires, motivations. So these people like to learn with people where there's lots of interaction and they can use that intelligence. Verbally linguistic refers to people's ability to analyze information and produce work in an oral or written form. So they like to be involved in things where there's speeches going on, where they've got to use books or they've got to write something so that they can use their intelligence. Logical mathematic describes people with a skill for equations, proofs, calculations, and solving abstract problems. So they're going to like to work with patterns, asking questions, experimenting, making connections. Naturalistic is about people who have a different feeling and connection to animals, plants, weather formations. So they like to learn hands-on experimenting. They like to be outside and getting involved with different parts of nature. Intrapersonal was talking about people's ability to recognize and assess the abilities of others. So they learn best doing things independently and researching their own stuff. Visual spatial was about comprehending things such, and they like, well, maps, graphs. They like to be able to use their spatial awareness, so those sort of things fit with their style. And then musical are people who have a predisposition to musical notes and sounds, so they like to learn things by song, they like to be involved in music, and there were quite often people who would like to listen to music while they're doing learning. And a strange mix of things, but we can see how you can start to individualize for each person, although on the learning style sort of angle it is a slightly different theory. So Gardner's intelligence theory, a little bit more complicated, and I find quite confusing as to actually defining a learning style. Felder and Silverman came up with 4 dimensions, and I think sometimes you could say that they're sort of mixing some of the ones we've had before, but they had 4 dimensions, and they were active or reflective, visual or verbal, sensing or intuitive, and sequential or global. And basically they talked about distinguishing which you were in each of the dimensions. So distinguishing between active and a reflective learner, according to them, we all have periods of being active learners and of being reflective learners. Most people lean towards being active learners. The most people like classroom environments where there's a help and a process where they get information. But reflective learners can feel overwhelmed by those sort of activities or group projects. So they get better involved working individually and being able to take time, as we've said, reflective about thinking about things, whereas the active learners want to get involved and get on with things. So you're either active or reflective, or a mixture of the two. Visual and verbal is just about the difference between how you use the information that you get from the instructions. So visual people like to look at things, verbal people like to hear things, and they also indicated they believe that most people have a tendency towards visual learning. I think what they were saying was that even if you're a verbal learner, you do like some sort of pictures or something to back it up. They then asked to think about whether you're a sensing or an intuitive learner. Sensing, more concrete, like facts. Abstract, sort of more happy with theoretical or conceptual ideas. So the sensing learners prefer solving problems, working out the facts, the formulas, seeing if things fit together, and they would lean towards things that happen in the real world and not getting too conceptual, whereas the intuitive learner is prepared to look at innovation, novelty, abstract ideas, hypothetical situations, and try and get involved in that and try and think about how they might be able to use those. And then finally, sequential and global was all about the way you like things organized, how you like to progress things and move forward. Sequential people, as it says, sequential, like small steps, take one step, then move to the next, then move to the next. And the global learners like the big leap straight into the big idea and then possibly work back from that. But the sequential learner wouldn't like that. They like to have each stage as it comes and know what comes first, what comes second, where global are quite happy to be hit with a big idea and then start to break it down. So lots of thoughts in there. That one links back very much to some of the Vark and the Honey and Mumford, and I think the Gardener's Intelligence one stands out a little on its own. But I think the whole process is, overall, it's just understanding that there are many different people out there, and we need to individualize for ourselves and think about how we best learn, and also about how we do that with the people in our workforce. So we'll start having a look in the next slide about how we address or consider those things. We need to consider learning styles as we go forward, and it can be quite difficult. But to aid it, we can have personal development plans where we're recording details about what people like and what their preferences are, and we can have lots of options available. And as we've gone through those learning styles, we've talked about different ways we could address things. So we can have different courses, we can have practical, we can have theoretical, we can have bits and pieces. But if we're unable to individualize, so we've got a group of people training, or we're having a course or something where it's not possible necessarily to do everyone an individual learning plan with a different program for each person, what we can do is try and have written materials perhaps to back up things, so handouts, checklists, so that reflectors and people who like to follow processes can do that. And we can also have plenty of visual aids and include them into things so that we're meeting everybody's. And what we can try and do is meet all people's needs in those sort of group situations. We can't individualize, but we can make sure that we've designed a process so that we've got bits and pieces. This course, for instance, we've got videos, we've got handouts for people to take away, we've got the slides which give a visual, but we've also got me talking over them. So we're hopefully trying to cater for lots of different people. And then we've got activities where people will go away and reflect and plan things. And hopefully you try and include lots of different opportunities so that people get all sorts of options. So, development planning. Why? Why do we do it? Well, the primary aim of development planning is to give direction for achievement of short-term and long-term goals. A personal development plan allows you to focus on yourselves, your strengths, your weaknesses, and how those things can be managed for self-benefit. It also plans for personal growth and gives you that self-awareness. Personal development planning is a process and a cycle. It's a cycle of self-reflection and action, and the purpose of the PDP, the plan, is to track what you're doing. It encourages people to develop themselves, plan for the future, and be self-aware, not just at that one set moment, but in how things are changing, how you're moving forward. To do it well, we need to be self-aware. We've talked about that. We need to be objective. We've talked about that. And we need to be able to reflect, and we've talked about that. We need to look at all the areas across the breadth of our role, but we can specialize in some areas. And for example, in yours at the moment, we'll be talking about your leadership and management skills. And we need to understand why we're doing it. And we also need to have a process that we can follow so that we can do it well. And we'll look at that. First, let's just summarize those points we talked about, why it helps and what it's for. So it helps us to set short and long-term goals. We all need a focus and a direction, and the plan is useless if we haven't got that focus or direction. It allows us to learn about ourselves and be more self-aware. I think that goes after what we've been talking about. That sort of comes naturally to the process of having a development plan. We can recognize our strengths and areas that we can improve in, or if we can't improve them, at least we can manage them and recognize them, a bit like we talked about emotions or unconscious bias. It can provide us with some balance and start to think about the good parts of what we're doing and perhaps stop negativity. Some of us can be all focused on just the things that we don't do well. And therefore, having a plan can enable us to face challenges and put something on paper to sort of help us focus on and take those challenges on. because ultimately it helps us focus on our careers and our roles and improve ourselves as people, which is best for the organisation and for ourselves. So, as I said, we also need a key process, and we'll look at the key stages of self-development planning on the next slide. So to have a process for our development planning, we need some key stages that we follow. And the first stage is review and reflect, and we've talked about that in our self-awareness. It's then about gathering evidence, and we've talked about that in self-awareness again, and in the feedback we can use. And then it's about reviewing that evidence and reflecting on it as part of our self-awareness. From that, we can decide on our objectives, and this is where we start recording stuff on our PDP. We can plan developmental activities based on our learning style and what opportunities we've got. We can review progression and reflect on our performance, so that's making judgments on what we've done, that experimentation, those concrete experiences, and we can record that on the PDP. And that's where it's really important that we're actually starting to record what we think about what's happened, and from that we update our PDP and really start the cycle again. So let's have a look at that as a visual. So something visual for those visual learners, and as we can see, it's about establish a purpose and a direction, identifying the development needs to meet that direction, identifying the opportunities that we can, so whether there's some training, some coaching, whether we can job shadow with somebody, formulating actions about how we're going to go about it, undertaking that development, recording outcomes, and then back to review, reflect and evaluate, and from that establishing more purpose and direction, where we want to go next and how we want to take it forward. So let's have a look at what our PDP will actually look like. This is just a template, as it explains in the guidance given. There's a template in the resource, there's a description of how to complete it, but also you may have one already, as long as it sort of meets these criteria. But as you can see here, we're identifying what the developmental objective is. We're talking about priority. Is it something that's important to your job role now? Is it something that's critical? Is it something that could be there for future development, or is it just a personal development thing? What activities do you need to undertake to achieve the objective? So, are you going to have to go on a course? Is it going to be coaching? Are you going to job shadow? Is it just something you're going to do personally with some research? What support resources do you need to achieve that objective? It's about clearly identifying that. Otherwise, you could be at a situation where you're in the process of it and you haven't thought about what you need. So do you need to get anything? Do you need any funding? Do you need to ask anybody? Do you need to source any materials? What's your target date for achieving it? And then what's your actual date of achieving it? And that's just so we can look at for future planning, whether we've achieved it, whether we've made sure that we had enough time, did we leave enough time? And the really critical point, and the box at the end is probably not big enough, but we need to evaluate whether it was effective, whether it met the need, what difference has it made. So we're going back to that. Has it met that objective at the beginning? It's got a review date on there. It needs to be a rolling plan. So, this is just a template, but you may have to continually update it and go on to another page and sign in and dating it just to show that you've completed it and it's your own work, really. But it's a personal development plan, so it's between you and yourself, and it's about keeping up to date and looking at making yourself aware of what's coming. One of the biggest problems or hurdles that anybody puts in the way of doing their development or keeping up with their development plan is not having enough time. If only we had more time. And if that is your excuse, then maybe that your time management should be something that's on your development plan to manage your time better, because your development is one of the most important things, not just for yourself personally, but for your role as well. And you need to be spending time developing yourself. So, next little activity asks you to watch a video around time management, and then we'll start looking at that in a little bit more detail.